Greetings and welcome back to another Powerhouse episode on the Power of My Identity podcast. It is your girl, Dr. Arubisa here, and today's episode we are going to talk about healing from traumatic experiences. And I have a very special guest. She goes by the name of Jessica Olumide. I hope I didn't mispronounce her name, but she'll probably correct me when I get on. She is a licensed mental health therapist, and she is a perfect person to come on and talk to us about how to heal from traumatic experiences, especially tell us some of the things our parents probably should have told us about trauma and, why it exists from childhood to date. And so I'm super, super excited for the conversation for today. But before I jump into the conversation, here is the boss quote for today. Delay on my end. All right. And so the boss quote goes, "It is okay to be a work in progress. Healing does not happen overnight." And I think this quote is so befitting for the conversation today because I think for many of us as African women, Black women living in the diaspora, we know that we go through various experiences that can cause trauma in our life, whether it is from intimate partner relationships, family relationships, work experiences, just growing up and navigating life. Sometimes I think we can safely say that everyone has experienced trauma. And so, without further ado, allow me to bring in my guest. Hi, Jessica. Welcome to the PMI guest chair.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I'm so happy to have you on. I'm super, super excited for today's conversation.
Good. I'm excited too. I'm really excited to be here to talk about traumatic experiences. It is something that we all, in some form or fashion, have encountered within our life. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I always like to share with our guests or our listeners how I know the guests. And so I met Jessica fairly recently. We're working on an alternative project, which she's going to talk about today. I'm super excited for her. We met through one of my good friends. And ever since then, I just love the work that she's been doing. I love her energy and I love her mission. So, Jessica, once again, thank you for joining me in today's episode. So I'm going to start off by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're a mom, wife, therapist, but who is Jessica in at her core?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Jessica Oladumie, and as Orobosa said, that I am a licensed therapist. I'm also the owner of the Mending Room Counseling Center for Wellness. It is something that is passionate to my heart. I love to see people thrive and grow and overcome certain obstacles of their life. And so that really stems from, a lot of my own upbringing and traumatic experiences that I have overcome and some that I am still working through. But I'm excited to be here today. I am initially from St. Louis, Missouri, born and raised. Love Ted Drew's ice cream if you're there, if you ever stop by. Um, but I love being, from the Midwest, everything about it, hospitality wise. I'm just all for people and people thriving and growing.
I love that, Jessica. I have never been to St. Louis. I have a friend who went to school in St. Louis. That is close as I've ever gotten to the Midwest. I've never explored the
Yeah.
Midwest, and I'm not sure why. But absolutely love that you started your business, the Mending Room, and I'm going to try to put it back up again. We're having a little bit of connectivity issues, so here we are. So yeah, she is the owner of your Mending Room, and it is a counseling center for wellness. She is has a digital platform, but she'll also be having some on-site services in the near future. So I'm excited about that. But it leads into my first question for today's conversation, Jessica. How would you define a traumatic experience? Because I know for many people we have our own definition, but as the expert in the room, how would you define someone or just a traumatic experience in general?
Yeah. So, a traumatic experience or trauma is anything that causes an emotional response to a life altering situation. Usually, these situations trigger us or can be triggers throughout life and how we respond to our needs, our wants, or other people's needs and wants in life. Our engagements with how we interact with other people as well. Traumatic experiences can be short term, something that is happens and then it's over with. It can be long term, which is what we call chronic trauma, or debilitating in a way of how we function in life. And it can be complex, which means that we have experienced multiple different traumatic experiences over time.
Yeah, I love the fact that we can clearly define what this is. I know for many people, the pandemic have kind of shed more light on mental health. I know prior to them, just being in the field, it wasn't the industry that got so much attention, especially among people of color. I think there's so many different types of stigmas and myths around the concept of mental health services and
Mhm.
mental health wellness. And so I'm so happy that we're having the conversation today because I think it does start from, childhood up. And I just know that just understanding what this is makes it easier to have a conversation on how to heal from it. And I know, Jessica, you're going to tell us some things that we can do. And so, Jessica, what made you go into this line of work, right? What called you to say, okay, I want to be a therapist?
Yes. So, growing up, I grew up in a home where both of my parents got a divorce. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of emotional abuse, physical, mental abuse as well. And those experiences caused a level of trauma as I grew older. Trauma is also the things that not only that we experience, but what we begin to believe about ourselves as well. And that plays a key role in that. So as I grew older, I just wanted something different for myself and for other people. I realized that what I began to believe about myself was more so being incapable rather than capable, being worthy of, or not worthy of, rather, than being worthy of love, acceptance, embrace. And those things really played a key role in how I begin to relate to other people, how I begin to relate to my friends, loved ones, uh, romantic relationships as well. Throughout time. And so I really desire to see people grow into a mending space, a place where they can really mend. Sometimes in therapy, there's this cookie cutter approach to things, but really in mending, it is really creating a space in where you feel comfortable, where one would feel comfortable to be vulnerable and open and honest so that they can grow past the hurt, past the pain and trauma, and eventually overcome.
Yeah, I think you said so much that just kind for me, it's like I understand where the passion comes from just being the boss behind the brand and just knowing that it was something that you went through and you can personally relate to. I think that's always relieving to hear when somebody who's offering this type of support services. And I think for many of us who are listening in, we can relate that, childhood trauma impacted us, and but it's something that can follow you from when you were younger to date. And if not addressed in a healthy way, it can really be stifling to your overall wellness. And so I love the
Mhm.
fact that your company is about mending. It's about
Mhm.
getting to this space of being whole and being whole healthily. But I think what do you think is a major contributor for many people to go through the various types of trauma? Is this something that's truly a part of life, or it's because we are human beings and we go through different situations that we should expect to experience traumatic situations?
Really, it is environmental. So a lot of the things happen within the home. And one of the things that is not often talked about that I would like to touch on today is generational trauma. And
Mm,
those are things that are passed down from one generation to the other. And oftentimes what we experience as trauma or our own personal encounters as trauma sometimes happen from loved ones who also went through their own traumas. And so it's passed down from one generation to the other. And then we tend to experience those traumas differently. And how we engage in those traumas are different in how we interact. So some of that is domestic violence,
yeah.
alcohol and drug addiction, child abuse and neglect. Sometimes, especially now that there's war in Ukraine and other countries are at war or have a very very brutal regime in government, that there's a lot of refugees. So that's trauma from coming from one country and then reestablishing themselves in a totally different country. Survivors of combat, those that are on the front lines, rape and incest, and
Mm,
even untreated mental illness. Sometimes I love that the Black community now we're beginning to start to embrace mental health, but that was not always the case. And over time, it was the stigma that, oh, you just don't talk about what you go through. You just, get through it and keep it and hold it inside. And so that untreated mental illness as well, plays a key role in how we impact other people as well. Colorism is a big thing, but then, communities of color, repressed anger, emotional and mental abuse, eating disorders, codependency, identity confusion, parental incarceration, and how that impacts a family when a caregiver is behind bars and cannot, be the parent that they want to be to their children.
yes, for many of us, we may have heard of generational curses, but to also hear you say that trauma can be passed down from generation to generation, I think is something that we need to talk about and dive in deeper, because it's like an umbrella term. You've listed, domestic abuse following people from, one generation to another, even financial abuse following people from one generation to another, so kind of unpacking this concept of trauma, I think, is the first step and for anybody to get to a place of healing, especially as a woman of color. Not only do we deal with the traumas of that we may have experienced just growing up in our own households, but just going through everyday life and the pressures that society has put us under. I saw a post earlier today, I believe it was on Instagram, where it was a friend of an individual who underwent a BBL surgery. And she did the surgery in the Dominican Republic. And when she came back, she recognized that in addition to having the surgery, which was botched, they also took one of her kidneys. And when they asked, when she was just kind of like, why did my friend do this to herself? The friend was just like, she never felt accepted. She never felt like men desire her, and hoping through this surgery to kind of fit societal norms. I think for many of us, we can relate to it in our own way. But the fact that she did this now and it was a botched job and she's missing an organ, it just speaks to the state that we're in society, that for many people, we're trying so hard to fit in, whether it is under the concept of skin color, body type now. And so I'm so happy that we're having this conversation and you just unpacking the term of what traumatic experiences look like. And I can even just talk about growing up in a cultured home and having an immigrant parents. And for many of my listeners, we're based all around the world, but we are of some type of Caribbean, African, or other type of descent. And we know that there are certain things that we just don't talk about. There's certain things that we go through that we just don't talk about. But
Mhm.
my question to you, Jessica, is how do we start the conversation on it, just expressing our traumas? And how do we do it in a way where we can heal from it versus not going into a space that you can put you in a place of depression because you're kind of reliving at the experience as you're telling it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first place to start is really just being aware and acknowledging our emotions. A lot of times, people that go through trauma will suppress it over time. And when they suppress their emotions and they don't really acknowledge those emotions show up in other ways. So if you think about pressing your hand against Play Doh or slime, that slime or Play-Doh is still there and it's just going to come in between your fingers. And so it's the same way when we suppress our emotions, those emotions show up in other ways in other areas of our lives. So that I think the first thing in really dealing with trauma is first acknowledging how the traumatic event impacted us. We have to acknowledge it. We cannot move on from it. We have to be able to process it and understand what has taken place and how it has impacted our lives. So I think that that's the first step into addressing trauma.
Yes, just kind of saying I went through it, right? Like
Mhm.
this is an experience that happened to me. But I think
Yeah.
for some people, they're afraid of people's reactions and responses to that.
Mhm.
And I think so much of your role as a therapist is to kind of just listen. And I'm
Yes.
pretty sure you have so many different types of stories of people just coming in, but honestly and transparently speaking, they're just looking for an outlet to release and then
Yes.
advice to move on. So just hearing the fact that first the first step is that you have to acknowledge that you went through something. It's relieving, and I could just think about my own experiences. I lost my mom at a very early age at 15, and it was until like 33, like 2 years ago, where I got into a space where I was just kind of like, I wasn't okay with the fact that she died, but I was not a space that I understood. Like I
Mhm.
understood that this is a part of life, and I
Mhm.
understood that I'm a Christian, so we will see again. But 15 to 33, that's a lot of years of just living in a underneath what I like to call a fear ceiling, underneath of suppressed, like you said, emotions. And I think for many women, we go through this. And so the first step is acknowledging it. But what do you think holds people back from just saying that they went through this trauma? Why did we not feel comfortable just to come out and say, hey, this experience happened to me?
Yeah. Um, Several things can cause it. It can be a reaction, like you said, and maybe some of us opened up and shared with someone that we thought we could trust to respond to our trauma in a particular way. And when they did not, then that taught us something. Okay, I can't trust anyone with this. I have to keep it inside. And so we bottle it up and keep moving on. The other thing is to accommodate other people. Honestly, sometimes feeling that our trauma is too much for other people. If I share this, maybe you even haven't shared it, right? But if I share this, how will it impact everyone else around me? So I need to just keep it to myself. And then I think as well, we live in such a microwave society. Things are We experience one thing today, and then the next thing, even on the news, when we look at one particular thing, and then we move on, to the very next thing the next day. The news cycle is a headline, and then you wait a couple of days, and something else is like top of the news again. So we process things and we move quick. But it's the same way with trauma. It's kind of like we experience it, and we may process our feelings, may not have, and then we move on. And so we just kind of bag it. But as women of color, uh, we are often taught in unspoken ways more than spoken ways to be more accommodating. So we accommodate other people. So we hold that space for our own trauma, we carry it. so that we can accommodate others or accommodate the environment that we're in. So if we're moms, it's accommodating our children. If we're wives, it's accommodating our husbands. If we're career women, it's accommodating the demands of our career. So we accommodate all those other spaces and we put ourselves last. So I think that those are a lot of the barriers that I see in clients that deal with trauma.
Yeah, and you touched upon a point of just kind of like daily responsibilities of for many women of color. We're responsible for a lot of things. We take care of a lot of things, whether it's our households, holding it down at the job, taking care of our loved ones, our spouses, our children, and you kind of find yourself putting you on the back burner. But my
Mhm.
question to you from that is that even a healthy thing to do, like to just say, okay, I went through this, but I got to accommodate and help everyone else? Is that healthy? Does that eventually impact your relationships? Does it impact your marriage? And it's particularly like, as you are married, will that carry over at some point of time?
Yeah, absolutely. It can carry over in how we deal with disagreements, frustrations, disappointments, whether it's disappointment in our kids, how we discipline our children, how we agree to disagree with our spouses or colleagues or friends. It really spills over into our personal relationships. And a lot of times, what people will do is they're people, they're human beings, and things will happen that trigger us, and that trigger causes a response. And so
Mm.
when we respond, rather react, I like to use that word better. When we react to a trigger, then we're usually reacting out of that traumatic experience. We in our minds, we're all the way back to whatever happened when we first experienced that traumatic event. So I think it's really unhealthy. But also, a lot of times we feel like we have to do one thing at a time. When
Mm.
really we can actually chew gum and walk at the same time. So we can actually get the help that we need and still be able to be there to as a supportive role to our families, friends, co-workers, whoever it is in our life. But it's the things that we tell ourselves that we have to undo over time of what we believe about that traumatic event.
Yeah, and you touched upon a point that I think other people may have like advised against, like this thing of multitasking. And you made that example very like simple, like we chew gum and we can be on the phone, or of course the
Mhm.
person on the phone is probably like, ooh, you're chewing in my ear. But you can do other things while doing alternative tasks, right?
Yeah.
And so is that necessarily healthy for a person to be like, listen, I've went through this traumatic experience, but I'm also trying to live life and I'm moving forward in life? Is that necessarily healthy to do, or is that a form of suppression in a sense?
Hmm. Um, I think it's healthy when we share with others. And first, let me say, being able to share your traumatic events with others, it's being cautious of who we can share that with. Not everybody is worthy to hear or be in our spaces of vulnerability. So it's really identifying those people first, but also just talking about it alone is still unhealthy in the sense that we're not really dealing with it. It's
Mm.
almost like we get a cut and we're talking about, oh my gosh, I have this cut on my arm and oh, it's causing so much pain. But you know what? I'm going to go to work later on today, but the cut is still there. And so
Mm.
we have to really address the traumatic event as well, and not just talking about it. And sometimes we feel like, oh, if I just talk about it, then that's good enough. I don't need a therapist, or I don't need to go down any form of healing or healing journey. I can just talk about it and be done. But really, it is being able to talk about it and get the coping skills that we need to really address the traumatic experiences that we've went through.
I like that. And I know that's what your company is all about. It's about creating
Mhm.
safe spaces. And so what advice or tips can you give rather to help somebody create a safe space with people that they trust?
Absolutely. So, what I like to say to my clients is we give ourselves to others in doses. We
Hmm.
don't necessarily say this is my whole life story in one sitting, right? And it will kind of feel odd if someone just said, "Well, let me just tell you. So I was born this day, and then this happened, and that," and we would be like, "Okay, wait a minute, this is too much." So we give ourselves to people in doses, and maybe that is just testing the waters a bit and understanding that, okay, well, maybe I can just say, I've had a bad day today. How does that person respond to me? Do they say, well, girl, I had a bad day too. Let me just tell you what happened on my day. Or do they say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you had a bad day. What do you need from me? How can I be there to support you? Those responses are totally different. So it's really understanding how our friends respond to our needs. And those friends that we know respond to our needs in a way that really speaks to who we are and what we're trying to grow to be. Those are the people that we want to connect with, to help us, as you know, to be our tribe, so to say, of support when we're going through and healing from traumatic experiences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely understand that aspect. And my next question to you is that for our parents, for those of us who have a parents around, how do we create a safe space with them? Because how we approach our friends about things that we've gone through may be quite different than how we approach our parents. And a part of
Mhm.
it is like the show is like what our parents didn't tell us about traumatic experiences. So how do we create a safe space where we can express what we went through, especially if the things that you went through was a direct response of being under their care or just being raised by them. And also know that as I'm sharing it with them, that it may or may not be well received.
Yes, absolutely. So I really think that first we have to be willing to be open, and transparent with ourselves. Am I in a place to have this conversation where I am not reacting in anger or frustration, because we want it to be well received. The whole point of it would be to heal, to get information, to move forward, in a way that is conducive to that environment. So I think really it's being open, and loving to our parents, right? But we also want to be respectful. We want to have respectful conversations with, especially the older generations. Growing up and being raised in a Black home, you just don't tell, mom and dad, well, let me just give you a piece of my mind, right? We don't talk that way because we want to be able to honor them and respect them, and in talking about delicate matters. And it's also being able to understand what they can take on in the moment. So they may not be able to sit down and hear what we have to say or address the issue or concern. And it's okay. We have to be willing in those moments to really meet them where they are and say, okay, if they're not willing today to meet, well, then maybe we table this for now, and then we talk about something else that we can address. Maybe it's a lighter issue of trauma that we can really address, and really learn from. Did they go through the same experiences when they were younger? How did they react? How did they feel? And then you can kind of piece together from those conversations how it's passed on from their generation to your generation.
Yeah. And so do you think time can truly heal traumatic experiences or responses from traumatic experiences? Is time a healing factor?
I would say to that, it depends on how we approach the situation. So, if it is an approach of, I just don't want to address it, I just want to move on past it, really, time then doesn't heal. And it comes off
Mm.
in ways that we really are unaware how we come off or how we show up in other people's lives. So if we're always reacting to trigger responses from a traumatic event, then people in our lives may tend to distance themselves over time, and we may find ourselves feeling isolated and alone. But time does heal all wounds when we do the work and we really get down in the grovel, so to say, to really understand why this traumatic event happened, how it impacted us, and how we can move forward from it. What do we need to do to move forward? Time then, yes, does heal all wounds.
Yes. And so the key concept of it is the work, doing the work, right? It's
Mhm.
not just, okay, time, it's years later and they have
Yeah,
the expectation that it
right.
healed me, but it's
Yes.
also doing the work to get to that space of healing. And I love that. I truly love that. And I think that's something that we needed to hear from an expert like yourself, because it's like, the going through life is not always easy, and that's what I'm learning in like this era of 30s. I'm learning
Mhm.
that it's not easy, but you can get through it. And
Mhm.
if you have the right things in place and the right support in place, you can get through it, and having mutually beneficial relationships. So you also being able to show up for the people who support you in your life,
Mhm.
I think is key, because for many people, because they went through these experiences, it starts to manifest in different ways, as you stated earlier. And so, like my best friend and I yesterday, we were having conversation, like, just worrying turns into fear, and that
Mhm.
worrying turns into anxiety, and then
Mhm.
now you're anxious, and then being able to communicate that with somebody who you may needed to do something with, it can be a challenge, and then that sets you into a whirlwind of like, oh my goodness, I'm done and I'm exhausted for the day, even if you haven't physically done anything. And so
Yeah,
I love the concept of you got to do the work to,
absolutely.
to get to that healthy space. And so it leads to my next question to you, Jessica, is what happens when you've done the work, but you find that for a period of time you feel good, but then you start to go back to the spaces that were particularly dark for you? What causes that? And then that's the first part of the question. And then also, how do we overcome that? Or if it's not something that we overcome, how do we heal from that, rather?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So whenever we're addressing trauma, we have to really look at, is it a one-dimensional or multi-dimensional facet? So we look at, well, maybe my emotions was impacted, but maybe my cognitive thoughts were also impacted. So maybe in therapy and doing the work, you address the emotional aspect of it, but then there's still the cognitive part of it. And maybe later on down the road, we realize, wow, I really view myself this way because of this traumatic event that happened, and we're triggered by it. It's totally okay to go back into therapy to address those matters, or rely on the tools used in therapy to do the work than to address that particular issue. But it's I find that it can be something that happens over time, whereas we grow, and as you said, that certain things pop up, certain things we remember, because as well, sometimes our mind blocks off certain things, and that really is to protect us. When we speak, I'm a believer too. I believe God is awesome in that fact that when something is so traumatic for us and we experience it, he blocks it out of our minds. Our minds cannot
Mhm.
remember certain parts of it because it's too traumatic and because it would be too detrimental for us to remember later on in life. So really understanding where it comes from, how did it develop, and then doing the work again. So maybe utilizing those same tools to address another issue of trauma, or maybe going back into therapy to address those issues.
Yeah, yeah. And triggers. That's what I get from you, like what you just shared. That potentially or will have triggers,
Mhm.
and things that you thought it was so behind you, but it just in that moment something just caused a trigger. I've experienced that, a few times in my life where I was just kind of like, I saw something that reminded me of my mom, and then it triggered a whole emotion that I didn't
Mhm.
necessarily think I was going to have for that day. Or
Yeah.
even relationships. And so that goes to my next question. Is it a real thing that you do grieve those traumatic experiences that you have gone through, or is it the people who you put that you went through this experience for, or the was the cause of that experience that will cause you to grieve?
Yeah, yeah. It can be a form of grief from traumatic experiences, and really that grief cycle can be for different reasons. So it could be that, maybe the person that really caused the trauma, maybe they're no longer around. Maybe it's,
Mm,
I've had clients that maybe a loved one caused the trauma and they got to the point, they did the hard work to really address the trauma, and that person is no longer there, in which they can address the trauma with. And it's also a place in cycle when we do grieve. We go through these experiences of kind of bargaining. Well, what could I have done different, or did I do something wrong in the traumatic experience? And those triggers that we talk about are really awareness. So thinking about it like an infant, a baby, when the baby cries, it is a symptom of an underlying condition. It is telling us, okay, if I'm crying, I either need my diaper changed, I need to be fed, I need to be put to sleep, I need to be soothed in some way, whatever the case may be. And that's the same thing with the triggers. The triggers are saying, okay, I'm bringing this up. Here it is. It's right here. And then it's up to us to decide, okay, what does that trigger mean? Does it mean
mm,
that there's something else that we need to work through? Does it mean that there's a level of unforgiveness? Because part of getting over or moving through or processing through traumatic experiences is that there has to be a level of forgiveness in which we embrace that we can't accept or change the past and wish for a different outcome. We accept it as it happened. However, we don't no longer hold ourselves to it or the person that caused it. We work through those things so that we can get to the next level in our
yeah.
life.
You said something that it like it did something in inside that word of forgiveness. And for a while for me, I'd underestimated the true meaning of forgiveness. And I think when I started like really strengthening my relationship with God, I recognized the purpose of forgiveness. But everybody may not see it in the eyes that I have seen it through God with forgiveness, or know the reason why you should forgive. And so, Jessica, can you tell us what is forgiveness, one, and how does forgiveness help you get into a space of healing?
Yes, absolutely. So, what forgiveness, I'll start off with saying with what it is not. It is not um, agreeing that what the person did was right. It is not putting down what you feel you have been wronged, or how you feel like you've been wrong. It's not putting that down so that you can embrace what someone else did. But really, forgiveness is no longer holding that person hostage
Mm,
to that particular situation that has happened. It is really releasing them from it, and it allows yourself to be free. Forgiveness is really for us. It is for us to be able to reconcile and process the wrong that has happened and move forward. It doesn't mean that we forget about it. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we feel, oh my gosh, this is an amazing feeling, right? But it does mean that we make a conscious effort to hold ourselves accountable, to releasing the offender from the offense, and allowing ourselves to be free as a uh, result of letting that person go.
yeah, Jessica, you saying it because for me, let me just give you a level of transparency. I am petty, but the Lord is working on me. But it's true. It's like we have. because I'm such a strong person, and it's for me, like I like to move, like I don't let what that happen like disturb
Mhm.
me too long. So I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna keep busy, keep busy. But when I stop, then it's just kind of like, ooh, this is what happened. Because usually in the past, I would just kind of like, okay, me and you have a disagreement. I don't have time for you. I drop you like a bad habit. I act
Mhm.
like you don't exist. But
Mhm.
and for the person in the outside, they're like, oh, she is so cold. Like she didn't even care. And that's not the case. But that was
Yeah.
just like my defense mechanism. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna let you see that, yeah, you hurt me. I'm just gonna show you I'm moving forward. But deep down
Mhm.
inside, it does hurt. And so when you
Yeah.
don't get to that space of forgiveness, you find like there's a lot of turmoil within you. And for
Yes.
me, it was like reliving it, like showing up in dreams, all kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Like, oh my God, I gotta let this go. And it's to your
Mhm.
point. You gotta free that person of the offense,
Yes.
and I guess the next follow up question to that, Jessica, is that forgiveness, is it something that should the person reach out to the person who offended them and say, hey, I'm forgiving you? Or is this something that you can do on your own and really heal from? Like, you don't maybe never speak to that person again, but you've gotten to a space where you're like, I forgive them. Is that even possible? Because for me, I for many years I was like, oh, that's not possible. Like, I gotta tell you
Yeah. Yeah.
when I'm
Absolutely.
ready.
Yeah. It is possible, and really it is still doing the hard work, and it takes time, especially if that person really wounded us. It does take time, and sometimes that forgiveness means that we no longer have that person in our lives. It just means that our paths are different, and we can forgive the person for what they did, but our journey together has ended. It's not really, petty in the sense of what we would think, like, oh, you hurt me, I'm just done with you, I'm moving on. But really, it's saying that, I recognize that my path moving forward is different from your path moving forward. Or it's that I recognize that the person I want to be, I cannot achieve if I have you on this journey with me. And so it's really being able to recognize that and moving forward. But we can heal. We can heal to a place of being able to really, truly know that if we see this person today, we would be able to speak to them without that feeling of hurt or pain, and how we speak to them, it looks different. It doesn't hurt anymore. We remember it, but how we deal with them is different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I absolutely agree, because it's to that point you said, you sometimes everybody doesn't have the opportunity to go on the full journey with you, that
Mhm.
God, that like this journey that God have you on. Not everybody goes with you through the long
Mhm.
run. And if I think for many people, including myself, that kind of letting go is like the hardest part. But once you kind
Mhm.
of let go and you realize how freeing it is, number one, and number two, who you are as a person, once you have let go of that experience and you forgave, and it is the start of your healing. So I love that. It's like you're letting go because it's not a part of who you desire to be. You
Yeah.
desire to be this person. And this is why it's probably disturbing your soul because
Right.
you know that it is not that this person can't go on the journey with you. But I think what our parents really didn't tell us, for the most part, I know my parents didn't tell me, is that, in life, everybody doesn't go on that journey with you. There are
Mhm.
people who are here for a few seasons, and then there are people who do life with you for the long run. But it's okay. Like it's okay to let
Yes.
go of people who are no longer at a space where you need to be. And my doctoral program taught me that enough, when times were getting rough and you really like, okay, who's in my corner? Because this is
Yes.
a hard work that I'm going through. It really shows you, like, not everybody's going in that same path, and it's not
Mhm.
a bad thing always, but I know it's a hurtful thing for many
Mhm.
people. I love the fact that he's like, think about who you want to be, puts you at the root
Yes.
of the
Absolutely.
situation. So I'm going to
Yeah.
shift the conversation a little bit, Jessica, because we've had some deep conversation and it's very good conversation about just this concept of trauma. Well, as we are now in the healing phases, what are some things that you recommend outside of talking to you, of course, and other therapists? What are some other things that people can do to help them heal from traumatic experiences?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we talked about acknowledging, right? Starting to acknowledge that it happened. And then once we start acknowledging that it happened, it is really understanding how it shows up in our lives. So it's really observing ourselves. I am a believer in journaling. So being able to journal and write down, certain encounters that we have with other people, maybe we reacted in a way that we feel like, man, I shouldn't have reacted that way. But we also know that maybe it comes from a traumatic event or a traumatic experience. So being able to write it down, well, so and so said this, and this is how I reacted. This is how I wish I could react differently. And being able to also write down where we think it came from. How did it start? When's the first time we felt like this happened? And how it impacted our lives from there. So definitely journaling can help. Being able to write what I call letters. So letters that we would send to the offender or someone that caused or created this traumatic experience for us. So maybe if, for instance, if someone was murdered, maybe it's writing a letter to the murderer. And of course, we may never send it or we may never hand it to this person. But sometimes writing it down, their studies show that when we write our cognitive thoughts down on paper, that it does release a lot of cortisol, which is a stress hormone that builds up in our bodies. And so when we release that hormone, then we're reducing it, and we're able to very, very much so relate to other people and then begin to become more aware. Also, another thing is being, as we understand through journaling how we become a certain person that we don't want to be, or how we react to different engagements, how will we want to react different? And it's holding ourselves accountable to that. Maybe it's connecting with those, our tribe of people, tribe of support, where we feel like we can really talk to them and say, this is the way I reacted, but I never want to react this way again. Can you hold me accountable that when something happens that, maybe you ask me, how did I handle it? And we talk about this in person. So really, it's also having accountability and holding ourselves accountable to the type of changes that we want to see. Meditation, prayer, all of those things can also center us. Those are grounding techniques to help us to ground ourselves in the midst of the moment, even sometimes when we're feeling triggered in the moment. When triggers take us back to the traumatic event, grounding techniques such as meditation and prayer keep us centered, and it keeps us present in the moment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you because for me, once I've recognized the difference between accountability and blaming, a lot of my life started to change, right? Like
Mhm.
when I made that shift of like I'm blaming this person rather than just taking accountability for the part I played in it and
Mhm.
knowing the part the other person played in it and knowing that okay, how do I do this differently or and just relief. I think in our community, especially as people of color, we have been conditioned not to feel safe in releasing what we've gone
Mhm.
through. It's just kind of building up. And then until you do something like Katie Kaboom. And the person is just kind of like, whoa. And it's all of that
Right.
is not meant for that person, but it was just at that breaking point and they just so
Mhm.
happened to be there. But I had got into that space of okay, accountability versus blaming, things started to change. And then praying, that was something that I really saw like changed my life, and it allowed me to let go of the things that I was angry about. Okay. And it also got into a space that what you're angry about, the person who probably is the offender probably doesn't even
Yeah.
consider that they're living their lives, you know. Like once I got
Mhm.
into that space, it was just kind of like, okay, now I can be free. And I think that's for many people, it is to be free. So I love the tips that you provided for us, Jessica. And so my last question to you, although I don't want to end the conversation, what is one thing you wish your parents told you about traumatic experiences, and how have you healed from that?
Yes.
What they didn't tell you. How have you healed from what they didn't tell you?
So I wish that my parents, about traumatic experiences, I wish that my parents would have told me that I don't have to live up to the expectations of other people.
Mm.
I really, for me personally, I live my life for expectations of other people, of how they wanted me to be, the insults, the comments, the different things that they said. And I took those things in, and I just, swallowed it and kept going. But I lived my life to kind of people please in a way. That's how my trauma showed up, is by people pleasing. And then how I overcame that is I really learned, and honestly speaking, is really recent, recently within the past, I would say 3 to 4 years, I really learned to live life on my own terms, on my God-given calling, on my God-given terms. That as long as I'm pleasing Him, that's all that matters. And when you was talking about prayer, another thing that really helped is whenever I was praying, I really felt like I pictured myself holding this big weight on my shoulders. And when I was praying, I pictured myself removing this weight and putting it like before the throne of God and saying, Here, God, I
Mm.
can't carry this. And a lot of times that's what trauma looks like. We're carrying it all by ourselves, and we're feeling like there's nobody else in the world that can help us or help carry it for us. And prayer allows us to do that. It allows us to let God be God and carry those traumas for us.
Yeah, I love that. And I can relate to that 100%. Because as you lifted, I had a dream where, and that's why I was like, up to 2 years ago, I kind of released the fact that, okay, my mom is gone and I understand that she's no longer here.
Mhm.
And I kind of getting at peace with God, because I had that, like a dream like that, where it was just kind of like, oh, like I'm taking the weight off of you. Be
Yes.
free. Be
Yes.
free. And that's what I got from your story is be free. You know, like
Yes.
freedom is
Yes.
very much attainable.
Yes.
Freedom
Absolutely.
is attainable,
It
but you have to
is.
do the work. And I
Yes.
love that. And so once again, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and sharing your story with me. I really
So,
appreciate you. And can you let us know how we can keep up with you on social media? I know you just launched your Instagram page, or relaunched your Instagram page for
yes.
the Mending Room. So just go ahead and drop your handles for us really quickly.
Yes. Absolutely. So it's at your underscore mending room.com, or at your underscore mending room on Instagram. You can go to yourmendingroom.com to schedule free consultations, your mending room on Facebook, and your mending room on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Please do. Please, listeners, as you're tuning in, get the help that you need and be free. That is the piece of advice that I can give to you. And thank you so much, Jessica, once again, for joining us here at the Power of My Identity podcast. You will find her description, her information in the description box below. And until next time, bye for now.
Bye, everybody.